Hello, everybody, and welcome to my episode of the Cheers to the New Year Mixed Media Frenzy Hop. I'm going to be watercoloring for you today, and I'm using this Pro Art watercolor paper pad, and it measures 12 by 16 inches, so I can cut it down to a 12 by 12 size, which is my typical scrapbooking size. And this is a cold pressed watercolor paper at 140 pounds, so let's go ahead and get started. Since our New Year's was very different this year, we didn't really do that much. So the only photo I have is of the little dinner/snack buffet we set up for the day. And so I'm going to scrapbook this photo and talk about how this year, New Year's, is different than previous years. And I was just going to do a burst of like bubbly background to this layout, but I got really inspired by that sparkling cider bottle in the picture and by the colors of the lights in the window. So I am actually going to do a more art painting mixed media layout here, but if you don't want to do an artful painting and you just want to use the mixed media part, pay attention to what I do with the splatters and the bubbles. So here I am penciling in the piece that I'm going to paint, which is that sparkling cider. It's a non-alcoholic drink, so our whole family can enjoy it. Sparkling apple cider beverage, and I created this little bottle shape, just really a basic shape, added a little label onto it, and I'm going to go ahead and start painting that. So when I'm picking my colors for this piece, I am going with some of the colors in my photo. So the oranges in my photo were a prominent color, so I'm going to use that, and then neighbors to orange, so I'm going to use yellow and red as well. And so I started with some spatters, and then I kind of wanted these spatters to flow into liquid. And that was inspired because when we opened one of these bottles, or actually several of these bottles of cider, it kind of burst and exploded everywhere. So I wanted to capture that feeling in this painting. So I've got the splatters and I've got the washy mixed media watercolor. Now I'm painting that bottle. And as I paint this bottle, I am mixing a green and a blue to get this kind of tealy color. And I give it just a coat of color all over, and I leave a little bit of white gaps. And it's just a random thing. I'm not doing anything special. I just leave a few here and there, and I add darker color around the edges. While that's drying, I go ahead and move on to my little bubbles, and I'm doing the same thing where I draw a shape and I leave white gaps. And besides, I tend to leave all of my white gaps to the right-hand side when I'm painting, because if I always do it the same, then everything will kind of match up. So besides that, there's not a lot of precision to this. I just kind of wiggle my paintbrush around and leave some gaps in the shapes as I go. So I usually work in threes. So I've got 3 reds, 3 yellows, and a few oranges. So now that my bottle is a little bit dry, I'm taking just a tiny bit of blue and coloring my label in. So if you leave everything pure white, that is supposed to show up as white in a painting, it's going to look wrong. So I learned a long time ago that you add just a hint of blue to make the whites look white. Now that the other parts are dry, I'm adding more of these spattery bursts. And one thing to note about adding spatters is if your watercolor paint is wetter, it'll have bigger spatters. And as you use up some of that wetness, your spatters will get smaller. So I try to keep the spatters that are bigger to the right-hand side and the smaller ones to the top of this bottle, so it gives more of that bursty, fizzy feeling with the small bubbles. And then with my bottle, I'm trying to add some of that color to the rim of the bottle, and this is a part that's very hard for me that I haven't figured out yet as a painter. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'm also adding some more darkness to the left-hand edge. Now, like I said, I tend to leave the right-hand edges a lighter color or more white to them, and then I add darker color to the left-hand edge and to the bottoms of things and to any place where things overlap. I'll add dark color. And then I'm just adding a general shadow to the bottom of this. Again, I keep the color darkest where it's close to the bottle, and I fade the color out as it moves away from the bottle. Now, here is that part where this rim wasn't working for me. And if you like to paint images, what I found just by doing this is that because it was too solid of a color, it didn't have any white left behind. So I am lifting some of that paint. I'm just using a clean, wet paintbrush, and I wet the dark part that I was working on, and that reactivates the paint, and then I can sop up that paint with my tissue, and that removes some of the color and leaves behind some white, which gives it more depth and dimension. So now I'm decorating the label, and I kind of imagine what the label might say, sparkling non-alcoholic cider, and I try to imagine where those words would curve around the label. And I don't intend for it to be perfect, and I want the word cider to definitely be readable, so I made sure that was on the side of the label. And then I add a little apple to bring in some of the red color, and then just to add more decoration to the label. So that is, oh, I'm moving on. I'm adding more shadow to this label with some more of that blue. Now, a lot of the blue that I'm using is, I use the Winsor Newton brand paints, and this is the Payne's Gray, which I understand that the Winsor Newton Payne's Gray is a lot more blue than other companies' Payne's Grays. I don't use other companies, so I don't know for sure. That's just what I've heard. So anyway, if you're interested in the color palette, I used, like I said, my colors are Winsor Newton. The green is Winsor Green. The blue is Payne's Gray. The orange, I can't remember the orange, red, or yellow. So I will pop those names up on the screen so that if you care, you can find out what those colors are. Okay, so I'm adding, once my layer of bubbles is dry, I'm adding even more bubbles, and I waited for them to dry because I wanted to overlap some of my bubbles. And once I've got that done, I erase all my pencil lines. As long as you don't paint over the top of your pencil lines, just paint really close to the edge of your pencil lines, then you can erase them away. So that is something to keep in mind with pencil, that if you paint over it, you can't erase it anymore. And now I'm adding a painted title, and I'm just using that Payne's Gray here. It looks black, but it's really a very dark blue-gray color. Now there you can see in pencil, I wrote out the next part of my title, and that's because if I've got something longer or more wordy, I need to make sure it's going to fit in the space properly before I get to work. So then I just paint directly on top of the pencil and make it exact, and then I don't have to worry about that pencil showing through because I'm using a dark color, and I don't have to worry about erasing it. So here we go. I did this bubbly bursty background, which was my intention from the beginning, and then I added in this pretty little bottle painting, did some watercolor titling and a bit of journaling, and that's all it needs. I thought about adding extra pieces and bits to this, but really I had so much fun painting that I'm just going to leave it as is. I really hope you enjoyed this, and be sure to check out the other guests on this hop so that you can see everybody's mixed media. And I will be back in the future with more videos, so do come back and join me.